Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 133 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. A podcast all about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with your friends even when you're losing. With me as always on my... Wait, what was that?
That's branding.
Yeah.
No, you were...
I was doing it.
I ruined...
Keep on message. Role. I am your host, Neelan, and with me as always are my co-hosts, Mark and Kellen. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Subsisting on saltines and Canada Dry.
That's the food of champions.
That's the food when you're not feeling well.
I think that's what Alexander the Great survived on.
What's the name of that soda?
RC Cola? My dad was...
Oh!
Manzanita Sol.
No! God, there's like
That's
a soda.
a good one, Mark. Have you
That's
had
a good
that?
one. Apple flavor.
Yeah. Apple, bro.
Lucozade. Is Lucozade a thing here?
No,
The
it's not.
hell
No.
are you
The
talking
only reason I know about Lucozade is watching the Premier League.
Oh, that's funny. I guess it's an English thing.
That's like the reverse Gatorade.
Is this some licorice flavored?
Well, no, Lucozade is what my mum would always give me when I was sick. So you talking about Gatorade just reminded me of that. The regional equivalent.
Lucasade
Yeah, they call Gators Lucases overseas.
Yeah, exactly.
in the Commonwealth?
Yeah, it's just like a super high sugared energy drink is basically the idea. It's the same deal. But
Is it
better.
different than Gatorade?
Oh, I think it's substantially different. Yeah, I think it's always like carbonated.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I just assumed it was a Gatorade.
Gatorade comes in different flavors, right? I think there's only
Yeah.
one flavor of Lucozade.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
Lucas flavored.
yeah, exactly. This week on the Board Game Barrage podcast, in response to last week's episode where everything got very, very heavy,
Too
we're going
heavy.
to try keep it light.
Keep it light, keep it fancy free.
Exactly.
Light and fun.
Yeah.
Which is why we had to kick out Monique.
Yeah, she was
Lavender
dragging us
cake.
down. And we're now going to bring it back up. We're going to keep it light. We're going to keep it airy. We're going to be talking about light games. And we're going to frame this in a similar context to how we did last week and how we were talking about heaviness and its value in games. We're going to be sort of looking at the opposite end of the spectrum and what that adds to a gaming experience. But before we get there, we're going to be talking about the games that we've been playing. So let's kick it off with Mark. What have you been playing?
So, keeping it light myself, I gave Reef a spin. Reef is the second in the Next Move series of games that started with Azul. These are, I guess, they're all basically abstract, sort of simple to pick up games with 4-letter titles. So, Azul was the first one, and then Reef was the sequel that overshadowed it, that blew it out of the water. No, I'm just kidding.
No one even talks about Azul anymore.
Fun fact, Mark, all the words in their game company title are 4 letters.
Ah.
Next, move, and then game, as long as you don't add the S to that.
Right.
So
that's trivia that, today I learned.
that's fundamental trivia. You're not a gamer if you don't know about the 4-letter Next Move game thing. This thing.
That's right.
So Reef is, like Azul, a game that has chunky components and is abstract and is simple to play, but impossible to master. No, I don't know if that's true. I only played it once. The way Reef works is you are building a coral reef. So if that's something you're into, there you go.
If you're into coral reefs.
Yeah, if people are hardcore into coral reefs and coral reef building, the Great Barrier Reef,
Yeah.
that's like a whole thing. It's like a wonder of the world. A modern wonder.
It is. You're not wrong.
You're going to talk shit about the Great Barrier Reef, Neil?
I wasn't. I have great respect and admiration for the Great Barrier Reef.
All right. Well, if you want to build your own Great Barrier Reef and you play Reef, what you're doing is you're doing one of two things in your turn. You're either drawing a card from the stack or playing a card. Drawing a card is just a way to get more cards in your hand. Not very much to explain there. Where the game is played, really.
Why don't you tell us more about that action?
So drawing a card is there are 4 cards in display. And you can pick one of them, or you can pick the one on top of the stack, which is face up. It's not a blind draw.
It's not top deck?
It's the top of the deck. You're literally top decking. But if you take that one, you have to sacrifice a victory point and put it on one of the cards that is in the array. So that's the rub. Anyhow, so now that I've explained that, thankfully, I'm glad that Callan forced me to do that. The second action you're doing is playing a card, which is where the game takes place. When you play a card, depicted on top of your card are going to be 2 reef pieces of various colors. And on your turn, you play a card, you take those pieces of reef and you put them on your board, which is a 4x4 square board.
Mark,
Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Is it reef pieces or reefs' pieces?
I actually like that one. That's good. Okay. So on your turn, when you play a card, you get 2 Reef pieces or Reef's pieces, and you are placing them on your board. You can place them wherever you want, and you can place them on top of previously played Reef pieces. So you'll have a board that has some spots that are empty and some spots that have 2 or 3 Reef pieces on top of each other. And also on your turn, after you've placed the pieces, there will be a scoring condition on the bottom half of the card. And if at that point you meet the scoring condition, you score points. The more complicated ones score you more points. The lesser ones score you fewer points. And you can score them for as many times as they appear on your board. So if you play a card, you put out a blue and a green piece, go ahead and do that. And then if the scoring says for every stack of tiles that is exactly 3 Reef pieces tall, you score 3 points. You look at your board. You say, hey, I've got 3 stacks that are 3 levels high. I score 9 points in that case. And you do this back and forth until I think the end condition is that either the stack of cards has run out or 2 of the piles of Reef's pieces has been exhausted. And then you score. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. I liked it. It was fun. It was easy to teach. Again, I feel a bent toward light games during this pandemic. So it sort of hit that spot. It was easy to teach to a person who I was playing with who was not heavy into games. So that was fun. She had a good time. Yeah, it's certainly not as good, in my opinion, as Azul. And I think it's probably a middling abstract. But, the presentation is nice. The pieces are chunky like Azul. They feel good as you roll them in your fingers.
Now we're talking.
I would give Reef a average above average, somewhere in that neighborhood. Great.
I think your point right there about it not being as good as Azul is, I think, the reason I didn't take to it immediately, because it was their follow-up game to Azul. So it had a lot of, pressure on it, for lack of a better word. Like, Azul is fantastic. Azul has certainly stood the test of time for them. But I played Reef at its initial showing at Gen Con and thought it was pleasant. It was great. I think it was maybe priced in a way that doesn't quite match up to its weight. And it didn't seem spectacular enough for me to want to grab it, was my initial take on it.
I have a hard time recommending this wholeheartedly, but if you are interested in it, Neelan mentions the price. The price has dropped dramatically on the second-hand market. So I think you can probably pick it up used for $10-15. It's not very expensive, at least if you go, again, secondhand. Speaking of secondhand, a quick shout out to the Math Trade, which our third annual, but we've done 3 in like 3 months. So our third monthly trade is wrapping up at the end of the week. So actually, if you listen to this on the day that the episode drops, you still have time to get in. You could get in as if you were there at the very beginning. So we just ran another test run and we had like 218 trades. So join the Math Trade and maybe get my copy of Reef, which is actually in the Math Trade. So there you go.
Oh, nice. There are actually now 2 editions of Reef, just for anyone who wants. They changed the colors and made it uglier. So you may want the first edition of Reef. It's kind of bright and bombastic, whereas the second edition is like, I want it to look like what the coral reef actually looks like, so it's more ugly and boring from a color perspective.
And I'll have you know that the copy, I just looked it up, the copy I have for trade is the first edition.
Mm-hmm. Mark's eyes lit up.
Come and get it.
Yeah.
So that is Reef by Next Move Games and Emerson Matsuchi, who is also the guy who tried to kill Splendor with Century Spice Road. So 2 tries to kill the big dog and 2 failures. No, it's a fine game. Both are fine games. I'd still prefer Splendor and Azul, but c'est la vie, as they say in Canada. In French-speaking Canada, they actually would say that.
Oh, that's true, actually.
They would say what?
They would say c'est la vie.
C'est la vie. It does actually work.
C'est la vie,
Yeah.
as they say.
Cessless, peaceless.
So I've been playing Clans of Caledonia, which doesn't really fit our theme this week. I guess it's a lighter version of Terra Mystica, so that sort of works. Clans of Caledonia is a game of sort of a combination area control, economic, engine building game. It is very comparable to Terra Mystica in that you have a hex map that is a bunch of fields, mountains, forests connected by rivers and lakes, and you place buildings or units onto the map, and those generate resources which you then use to place more units and buildings onto the map. One of the things that Clans of Caledonia adds versus something like Terra Mystica is a market where all of the resources that you accumulate through your units, so for example, if you have a dairy farm on the board, you're going to get milk at the end of the turn when you produce. All of these resources can be traded on this market, which works in the way that most board game markets work, which is to say that If you buy some of that item, then the price of that item goes up. If you sell some of the item, the price of the item goes down. So there's this little bit of an economic aspect to capitalizing on the goods that are either going to be profitable through selling or that you'll be able to buy cheaply and turn into other goods. At the end of the game, one of the major ways to score points is going to be fulfilling contracts, which is using your goods to get what are called export goods that just have victory point values at the end of the game, and also by creating settlements on the map. So a settlement is just a connected group of buildings. So if you place a building across a river or across a lake, then you're effectively creating new settlements. You can also split your settlements in creative ways by using the objects to fulfill contracts. So if at the end of the game you have more settlements than anyone else, you're going to get a bunch of points. You're going to get points for fulfilling contracts, you'll get points for those export goods, and you'll also get points for fulfilling goals at the end of every round, also similar to Terra Mystica. So you might want to get a specific type of good early on in the game. It is, on the whole, I would say, a simpler rule set than Terra Mystica, but to my mind, not as satisfying. I found that the process of placing units onto the board, getting resources, turning those into money in order to place more units, kind of just became a little bit rote. A lot of this could be because the clan that I was playing with, which is Clans of Caledonia's version of the factions that give you a little asymmetric power, it kind of led to a very one-note gameplay style where I was just producing as much milk as possible and selling that.
Milkman Nealon.
That's me. That's Clan Cunningham. And it ends up just being like, get as many dairy farms onto the board as quickly as possible, make a lot of milk, and sell it for high value. And I didn't have much more to play within the rule set than that. I'm sure it would be
chocolate.
I should have branched into chocolate milk. That was my mistake. Well, there is cheese, but not a good idea for Clan Cunningham to make cheese out of milk because you can't sell your milk anymore. But it does have that. You have secondary objects that you can upgrade from your previous one. So there are some of those interesting decisions of like, okay, do I keep the basic good and sell it? Do I turn it into a secondary good and use that to fulfill contracts? There is some fun stuff there, and it does have the Terra Mystica interaction of you trying to sort of get next to other people and trying to cut off people's positions on the board in a way that, for example, Gaia Project has somewhat lessened. Interesting game. I don't think I like it as much as Terra Mystica / Gaia Project, but one I'd want to check out more.
Yeah, I played this once a couple years back, so my memories are a little foggy. I remember thinking it was a blend of the obvious Terra Mystica with a dash of Marco Polo with the player powers, because they seem to be, I can't remember the details, but they seem to be pretty strong.
Yeah.
But I think, again, if my recollection is correct, they did sort of lead to that clear path to play. You know, you like to have player powers that sort of like nudge you in a route and you can sort of branch out from there. My recollection with Clans was like it was much more focused, like you were sort of clearly going to go down a path.
I would be interested to, and I should have done this actually, is look through all the other clans' powers to get a solid idea if others had that same problem. But even just in my memory of contrasting it to Terra Mystica, where every clan does have a very specific specialization, but it's across multiple different categories. You know, there's special ability, a fortress ability, and so on. So like trying to figure out what exactly the best way to use them isn't so clear. In fact, that's a lot of what the game is okay, this is an interesting power, but what does it actually mean for me? It did feel like clans, at least the faction power I had was just like, okay, get milk and sell milk, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Is it shorter?
Yes, I believe so. It's hard to say because I played asynchronously over like the course of a couple of weeks, but I got the impression, having also played an asynchronous game of Terra Mystica, that Clans runs a little bit quicker.
Just for the listenership of the podcast, I started an async game with Nealon of Innovation before we started the podcast. Not this episode, but the podcast itself. And he still hasn't taken his turn, so we won't ever know how long Clans of Caledonia takes.
That is not even remotely true.
You think I just made that up right
now?
Yes,
I did. I think you did that to perhaps divert attention from an async game you're playing.
What?
I don't know.
I'm not the one slowing down Marco Polo right now. I've looked at it like 20 times. Someone needs to collect their bonuses. I think it's Mark.
It is me. It's definitely me.
Milan.
Sorry. I'm sorry. But that is it for Clans of Caledonia by Karma Games. Kellen, what have you been playing?
Well, and wanting to keep up with the latest hotness and the only true and living Doctor, I got to play another Reiner Knizia game that is currently on Kickstarter now. This game...
Sorry, go ahead.
You have a joke?
The latest hotness being a game he's rehashed from like a decade ago. Go ahead. Joke inserted.
Tutankhamun.
Isn't it?
Is that how you...
Tutankhamun's with a Z at the end?
Yeah. Tutankhamun. It's a Knizia game, right?
Tutankhamun. That is Tutankhamun, if you're looking to look that up without the Z.
This is from my homeland. This is representing the ancient civilization where I am from. So I should know. It's spelled with a Z at the end.
Deeply thematic, yes. So this is coming to us as a redo of an old Reiner Knizia game, also called Tutankhamun. And it is a light game that is 2 to 6 players, and I think it's probably less than 30 minutes long. It's weird. It's a weird game, but it's interesting. So everyone starts with 24 points, or a certain amount of points depending on the player count. And then once you get to 0 points, you win the game and the game ends. So everyone starts at one end of the Nile, or I think it's the Nile. It's an Egyptian river, so I assume it's the Nile.
It's the Nile.
And it's laid out beautifully. The artwork in this new edition is great. And I've only played this on Tabletop Simulator, but really, really think the artwork is beautiful. And each piece of the river is part of a set. So there might be 4, sarcophaguses in a set. And so that first piece is a 4, and then the next piece is an 8, and a 9, and a 7. So these are all sets that you're collecting. But what's interesting is you get to choose where you want to move. You could literally, on the first turn of the game, move to the last spot closest to the tomb. You would lose the game if you did that. But you can just go wherever you want. It's collect any piece you want. And the turn order doesn't change. You continually go in circles. But once everyone has passed certain tiles, those go into another area and things get scored. So once all of the 4s have either been collected or passed, that's when they score. And the person who has the majority of those tiles will get 4 points, and the person who has the second most will get 2 points. And that's the only time those score. So you may be setting up these big combos where you're like, okay, I'm going to pay off on the 8 and the 9 and the, 7, but it doesn't matter if those happen at the very, very end. They'll never pay off because someone will get to 0 before you get to those end tiles. So it's this weird family weight game that has more complexity going on. There's also god tiles, which have special powers, which allow you to move stuff around on the board, or allow you to take something out of the tomb that's already been passed by other players, or allow you to sort of move back in the line of boats. For being a family weight game, for being a very simple thing to teach, I basically just taught you how to play it. It's very interesting. And the score going down screws with you is confusing enough, but it's light, it's fun, it's on Kickstarter now. There's a tabletop simulator mod that you can try while it's on Kickstarter, which I think is fantastic. And I'd totally be willing to play with both of you and or play it with people on the Board Game Barrage Discord if they wanted to. You can find that at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Yeah, the game is on Kickstarter now. It's got a bunch of different editions. I don't know that I'm in for the $60 Game Mat Pharaoh Edition Deluxe thing. I think this is once again a pretty light thing, but I enjoyed it from the good old doctor. He does not disappoint here. Definitely more interesting than some of the other recent Reiner Knizia games I've played.
I'm curious about this one because this one in its previous incarnation was sort of known as one of his lesser games. So I'm interested to see. I don't know anything about it. I've never played the original version of Tutankhamun, but I'm curious. Do you know if any rules changes have been made? Is it?
Yeah, so the special powers were not in the old game.
Okay.
That was actually the only thing I was skeptical of after playing it, was they didn't always seem very useful, and you'd almost always want to go somewhere else. But I think this does the same thing that the other Reiner Knizia Whale Riders Kickstarter did, is 2 to 6 players, and I'm like, off, basically. If you played this with 6, you'd have virtually no control over anything.
Right.
But at that 3 to 4 player count, it takes a really straightforward concept and then makes you think about things just a little bit differently. And in this case, it's the score going down. I can go as far as I want, and some of those later ones are not even going to score because other people have to get in on it, or it's never going to score.
Right.
And so evaluating sort of the distance of the set collection, right? Because this could be a little card game, but all the cards are laid out, and in this case, they're tiles. And so it's a different way to visualize sort of a simple set collecting game, and I think it's really interesting.
How long did it take?
Less than 30 minutes.
Okay, fantastic. That's great.
That is The Only True and Living Doctor Tutankhamun by 25th Century Games, and that's on Kickstarter now if you're interested in checking it out. Oh, the screen printed components are cool, though. Sad Kellen.
You going Pharaoh? Pharaoh pledge?
Yeah, game mat, so I can hang that in my closet, up with my suits.
There you go.
So before we get into our feature topic, I want to talk about our Patreon. This is a fantastic way that you can support the podcast. We use this entirely just to maintain all of the cool content that we do. None of this goes into our pockets or anything like that. We're using it to buy hosting. We're using it to buy equipment. We're using it to purchase the board games that you want to hear about. So you can support us at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon. And there are some fun rewards there, especially if you're in the Discord. You can get bonus episodes that we release once a month.
We're recording one right after this episode, in fact.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're in the Discord, you can get your very own tank color. So you'll become one of the tanks in the Board Game Barrage Armory. If you are one of our patrons, thank you so much for your support. Other ways that you can support us for free, though, would be...
Oh, you forgot to mention the secret exclusive hashtag Patreon channel, where all the real talk happens.
That's true. Like, there's some good, little behind-the-scenes discussions where we're talking about, upcoming stuff in our lives and the podcast there. So, yeah, please help us out at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon. Otherwise, if you don't...
Help us move into video. Fund our move into video, taking over YouTube.
We need to become the next big YouTube star. But yeah, if you don't want or can't financially support us, then please leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Stitcher or whatever podcast platform you use. Reviews help us. They help get the word out. Or you could just tell a friend about the podcast. If you know someone that plays board games and just looking for some fun stuff to listen to during this quarantine, please send them to our website and our podcast. We're putting it out every single week. Let's get into our feature topic. We're going to be talking about light games and what lightness brings to a game, what lightness means to us in board games, and when we want to play light games. So let's kick it off with a little bit of a round table, just very briefly. Mark, what are your opening thoughts on what lightness in a board game means to you?
Lightness means a game that is, I guess, easy to teach. Is basically, if I had to summarize it in one sentence, a game that is easy to teach, to me, is the purest form of what a light game is, if that makes sense. I think light games can have deeper levels of strategy, and they can have rule sets that are generally going to be on the shorter side. But I think for me, when it comes to what I consider a light game, it comes down to how easily can I open up the box and teach it to somebody. Which is weird. I hadn't even really thought of that as a definition until you asked me, but that's just what jumps to mind.
That's kind of one of the funny things about these categorizations, right? Because, we have a lot of them that are sort of semi-nebulous in the board game space, like the idea of what a filler is and what a light game is. And, they're not mutually exclusive, but they overlap in interesting ways. Like, fillers are often light games. A light game doesn't have to be a filler game. Like, I would say that you could have a fairly long light game.
Just not a good one.
Yeah, well, no good games are light games?
No good games are light, long.
Oh, light and long, I see. I don't know if I agree with that.
Fight me. Name one.
Oh, man, I don't know. I'm struggling now to think of one that's especially long, but also very light.
I put a podcaster on the spot, someone who does this every week and has done 130 hours. Can't come up with one.
Light and long.
I don't know, I feel like maybe Werewolf fits this bill a little bit as a game that is something that a lot of people have played in various forms, whether they've either played Mafia or Werewolf or some variant of it. Most people are aware of it, have been thrown into games at some point, and those games often take 2 to 3 hours.
Especially if you play with Neil.
Yeah, exactly. Who today has actually never played Werewolf.
You haven't?
No, I haven't, actually.
Ultimate Werewolf?
I've only played One Night Werewolf. That's actually the only werewolf.
No, Ultimate Werewolf is different than
No, I know. Yeah, so Ultimate Werewolf was the encapsulation with all of the different roles put together. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah.
And there's a new version of it coming to Kickstarter soon.
Really?
Yeah, I can't remember what.
I think what is interesting about the nomenclature light is that it kind of doesn't mean one specific thing. It's not always going to be a game that you can break out at any point in the same way that a filler game is designed to be, right? Kellen, anything else that you want to add about light games?
I do just want to preface the whole episode by saying I am under the weather, so I can't be held liable for my opinions. No, it's I've been at work performing, and it's I keep wanting to tell people, by the way, I'm sick. That's why I sound like a right now in both how I sound and what I'm saying. So I just wanted to make sure our listeners knew that I've been sick since we started recording this podcast. 130 episodes ago. No, light games for me are some of my bread and butter. You know, I'm continually arguing for things on the lighter end of the spectrum. But for me, I think we can use the nomenclature from last week where if a game is like has a ton of rules and is light in the strategic decision-making process, that is the death spell for me. So I can tell you like a light game that's bad, and that's Vast. I've not played the Mysterious Manor, and I'd be interested in doing it, but Vast, the original game, the rules are so long for each individual faction. And once you get through all of them and everyone is playing together, you go, hey, wait a minute, I'm playing like baby's first hand management game, you know, and it took 35 minutes to get us into this game, and he's playing baby's first action point allowance game, and it doesn't add up. And so it's a lot of layers for ultimately like very light decision making, and that is not acceptable for me as a gamer. So we always hit on these games that are so easy to teach that I could teach my mom. You know, it's kind of how I think about it, and it's because my father won't play anything with me because he hates games. But my mother, you know, it's like, okay, we play a game like Ingenious, and it's like borderline light. You know, and it's heavy strategically. There's a lot of fun decisions being made, but the rules are so light. So light is this combination of the two of those things, where Ingenious strategically is much deeper than its rule set. Its rule set is so easy. You know, it's like, Mom, just put it down. We get halfway through the game, and then she's mad because she's probably lost already. But that's where we find some of our favorite games, or my favorite games. You know, when we play Blue Lagoon by the Dr. Reiner Knizia, right? 2 games back to back here, where the rule set is so light, but then the game makes you go, oh, you know, like that moment is what I look for. It's like the least amount of rules to where I can get to, oh, that's interesting. And that's why I'm always pushing towards these lighter affairs.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And actually, you reminded me of another Knizia game, in fact, which is Quest for El Dorado, which is probably one of the lightest deck building games, I would say, in terms of its rule set. But one of, I would say, the more interesting, and the one I'm most likely to teach non-gamers because of how light it is and how easy to explain it is. And because it just has that Knizia twist of like, he's taken the fundamentals of deck building and condensed them down to just the basics that you need, and then added this fun race game on top of it. And I feel like that is the strength of a light game done well, is it's just got enough of the morsel of the thing that you're looking for. So like you say, make you go, oh, this is an interesting thing. This is a type of game I've never played before. Because if you show something like Quest for El Dorado to someone that's never played a deck builder before, it's going to get their wheels turning, you know, in a way that, for example, I couldn't probably teach Dominion to my mother, for example.
It's really interesting. Back to Kellen's point really quick. I have rarely, since people have been talking about it, have rarely been interested in playing Vast, given the middling to negative reviews. But you sort of have my interest peaked because when you describe a game that is really complicated to teach and yet light in the decision space, and you classify that as a light game, and I understand why you classify it as a light game because the argument makes sense. But I'm just trying to envision a game that I know like that, because like I'm trying to figure out if I would, after playing Vast, if I would describe it as a light game. Again, I have not played it, so I don't know. But a game that has a lot of rules already, for me, I think that would cross the threshold from light to medium or heavy or whatever it is. But I know there's a flaw in there if you base it on decision space rather than rules.
I mean, and I think Vast is an interesting example because it's basically 4 games.
Right.
That are all interconnected. And so any one of them, you would immediately know it as a light game. And then when you interconnect them, like it's still a light game. I think, you know, I'd be interested, do you think that Risk is a light game? Like classic vanilla Risk?
I think so. Yeah, I would classify it as a light game.
Because it's quite long, and it isn't something that you would want to just pull out with anyone. I know there's a lot of heritage in Risk that people know how to play it, but like even the combat system, and I mean, I guess it's light.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, again, hadn't thought about this until Neelan brought it up, but for me, Risk is light primarily because I feel confident that I'd be able to teach it quickly to somebody who is not familiar with it or other games. And again, this is just an instinctual reaction to being asked what I think a light game is. Neelan, you've played Vast, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, Vast is in this weird space because I think Kellen's absolutely right, is that if you teach one person their rules, that is a very light game. Like Vast, I don't think of as a light game personally because I'm always in the position of having to keep all of the rules in my head, right? So I have to teach 5 different people all of their rules. So for me, it's a cognitive load, but that's not shared by the people playing it, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, it exists in this weird space, which I think is honestly the reason that Kellen and I bounced off of it, because it's a game that largely outstays its welcome based on how heavy its rule set is taken as a whole.
Right.
What about Ganshan Clever?
Yeah, Han's Clever or Twice as Clever, games that are easy to explain, but just feel like these very, strong mental puzzles, almost kind of like in the vein of, we've used Sudoku jokingly before, but like that's what these sorts of games.
Count Dooku?
What's that?
What did you say?
Sudoku.
Oh, okay. There you said it.
Did I say Count Dooku? I could have.
Is he the guy in Star Wars that coughs?
Yeah.
Okay.
The guy with 4 lightsabers, the best non-character in all of Star Wars. Oh, wait,
I
no,
just like
sorry.
his
I'm
cough.
thinking of the wrong person. That's not Count Dooku.
That's a Grievous.
I'm thinking of Grievous, yeah. Count Dooku.
Oh, is he-
Thank you.
Count Dooku
Which is the
is
one that
Christopher
coughs?
Lee.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Okay, yeah. Grief is the one
He's a
that coughs.
cool bro.
Grievous is the
He
coughing
tries-
robot. That's right.
Yeah. Oh, I just love a coughing robot. That's one thing about me.
One of your favorite character subtypes.
That's right.
Sudoku is the word I meant to say there. So these games feel like that. Like Sudoku is a rule set that you can explain very easily, but there is a lot of extremely complicated Sudoku if you sort of dig far enough. And like games like Twice as Clever, Hanson's Clever, and those sort of style of heavier quote unquote roll and writes, I definitely think also fall into this weird space of easy to explain, but God, sometimes you just look at that mat, you look at your dice, and you're like, I have no idea what's even good to do here. Like, it feels like a puzzle that is at times hard to solve. So, one of the reasons I sort of thought that this was interesting was for a reason that you mentioned earlier, Kellen, which is we tend to have a lot of light games in our top 50 lists. And especially like as you get towards the top 10, we have stuff like Codenames, Time's Up, Biblios, which are games that are not like especially heavy games that we love a lot. The Resistance, these are all games that you could easily teach to a lot of people, don't have like intricate, complicated rule sets, but are ones that we're just hugely passionate about. So I do think it's something that's always been like close to the heart of the podcast, is this idea that a game doesn't have to be super complex in order to be good.
Yeah, I think for me, the ideal games for me, and I think Kellen has basically said this, are like games that on the mogul scale, which is what we talked about last week, where games are classified on 2 axes, basically a 1 to 5 axis in terms of rules, complexity and amount of rules, and then an A to E scale where A is a game with small decision space versus E where the decisions are much more complicated. I think the best games are ones that would be like a 1D or E. That would be my ideal sort of games. 1 or 2 and then D or E's. And I think Arboretum is like, for me, the poster child of that game. A game that is a very light rule set, but has agonizing decisions, which are, again, my favorite type of games.
I think if we're getting that specific, I think where I would disagree with Mark or push back a little is that I think that there is room in a game night for the game that is both less rules overhead and barely has decision making. I know like one that we got a lot of fun out of was Dice Fishing Roll and Catch. Which was that.
We got
That
a
was
lot out of.
What are you talking about?
I thought it was
I don't know if
fun.
we got a. I don't know if we got.
Did you have fun? Did you laugh?
I laughed. I did laugh.
And this is a game where you're just rolling dice and everyone keeps rolling dice and it's a push your luck sort of affair where everyone has a set of different colored dice and the rules are just so simple and dumb that for me, I do agree with you that broadly my favorite games are probably 1 and 2 to the D and E, but I'm willing to push into the B and even the A perhaps, depending on, I don't know, they probably have Candyland in there, but depending on the mood, and I think that's an element that we touched upon a little bit last week, but is also really relevant to the lighter games. There are people now who, based on what's going on in the world, like light games is all they've got, like we're not going to have time to sit down and play a 4-hour game. Our game groups are not getting together. We're staying at home. Or, we just don't have the brain capacity for it. And that's what's so good about the range.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, which is, again, something that we alluded to last week, where I feel like light games exist to occupy this sort of mental space that we're all finding ourselves in right now, right? Which is like, it's too taxing for me to sit down and play a game where I'm going to have to like try to take in a large amount of rules in a short amount of time and then play for 3 hours. Often when I sort of end up floating like a tabletop simulator night, two friends, it's like it's a series of shorter, lighter games, because that's kind of all where we're at in terms of, frankly, in terms of just the mental load that we can accommodate right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I find myself, I mentioned this earlier, but yeah, I just find myself gravitating toward lighter games given the current environment, and especially with things like Tabletop Simulator and Tabletopia. I just, for whatever reason, don't have much appeal in staring at a screen for 2 hours or whatever and really agonizing over decisions. For some reason, it being abstracted into a screen rather than the components on a table and my friends across from me at the table, there's a lot that's lost. And so, therefore, I just feel like lighter games have been more appealing to me recently.
Yeah, so let's get specific for a little bit. Do you guys have any like light games that you've either been playing lately or you just want to recommend or throw out that have just been on your mind that you want to talk to our audience about?
Christina and I have been playing another small box game from John Cloudis. This one is called Cacti, and it is so simple that it's even listed as having a 15-minute playtime on BGG, which I love. I love when it's like, we're going to acknowledge it and not just double everything, you know what I mean? Times2 is what advertisers will put on it. But Cacti is a game of just collecting. It's a set collecting game where there are 5 cactuses in an array, and you choose one species, and then you get all of that type. And you're sort of collecting them in your garden, and there's little decisions. So at the beginning of a game of Cacti, you get one of the 4 species, and that species does not count against you at the end of the game. And you're using the other cacti to build little gardens, little like arrangements of the succulents. So one of the types of cacti, you'll just score all of them at the end of the game because that's sort of your special. But everything that you have left over that's not in an arrangement or not part of your bonus is negative points. And so you quickly go, oh crap, I don't want to take more cacti right now because I can't put them in the array. And it's just this very light thing that, you know, I played it 2 or 3 times in a row the first time I played it. And Christina and I kind of just leave it out and we'll come back to it. It's very good. Very simple, very light. The rule book is 1 page, 1 sheet, one side of 1 page, 15 to 20 minutes, Cacti.
A game that is a lighter one that's been on my mind, especially since it just won the Spiel des Jahres, is The Crew. It's actually the game in our math trade, one of the games that I'm most eager to trade for. This is a trick-taking game, so you have a opening there to introduce it or to teach it to people who've played other trick-taking games where you're playing different sort of missions where you're trying to accomplish certain things. It's just been a game that I've just been very eager to play again since we played it at Dice Tower West.
One that's become like a perennial favorite for me, especially with non-gamers, is one I mentioned was a huge success with my family over Christmas. This is Deep Sea Adventure. I think it fills that perfect, in the way that a lot of Oink games do, quite frankly, that perfect sort of space of just being interesting and cute and novel and taking very little time to explain and play, and also being super, super light and portable. Otherwise, I continue to play like Cities and Twin Tin Bots as online async games, and yeah, they're also just light and pleasant enough, which is a pleasant contrast to an ongoing game of Food Chain Magnate, which I'm in, which I am stuck on $0 and unable to make any money and just riding out for the next 3 weeks, I guess. But yeah, I feel like one of the other things that happened recently is I had a group of friends that had played Quest for El Dorado before, and I tried to find that on Tabletop Simulator and it doesn't exist. And I thought, oh, well, that's a pity. Well, what's another nice race game to fill that niche? And Flamme Rouge is another excellent game that has, a simple to explain rule set, is a race game, so it is intrinsically intuitive and just surprisingly fun. Like catching like those perfect positions where you are slipstreaming off other people is just always satisfying to pull off.
That is about as light as it gets.
Yeah, it really is. Like, and that's the thing. Is like, I think Flamme Rouge is not, honestly enough to my mind, an amazing game, but it's a game that always goes over well, and it's kind of just pleasant enough, just light enough. One more thing I wanted to quickly just touch on. I don't think we're necessarily going to go in depth into this, but in response to like last week's episode, someone brought to our attention like a quick data plot of heaviness on Board Game Geek versus its rating. And there's like an interesting correlation as the average rating of a game goes up as it gets heavy, to suggest perhaps that there is a heaviness bias on Board Game Geek. And I don't think that I necessarily want to draw any conclusions from that, but I think it is interesting to like consider the idea that perhaps either it could be said that there is this bias towards heavier games when it comes to rating games on Board Game Geek, or maybe there is some truth, if you wanted to believe that heavy games tend to make for better games, which is kind of the perspective I kind of almost refuse to fall down on. You guys have any interesting thoughts on that?
Well, I think a couple things. One is we should probably link to that chart of information in the show notes. So go ahead and click on the show notes to look at that. I haven't had a chance to look too much into the chart. I have heard that this new formulation, taking the heaviness sort of out of it, would move Biblios up in the ranking. So I'm all for that.
It moves the resistance well up as well. So yeah, I was
okay. There you go.
Into that.
And I definitely see the appeal of lighter games. Biblios and Arboretum and Time's Up are among my favorite games. But I do intrinsically still feel like I prefer, again, games that are closer in that mogul scale to that D and E thing. I like that brain burnery thing, and I think it's easier to find in heavier games, if that makes any sense, than lighter games. I think lighter games that get you there are probably, subjectively to me, better games, the ones that are lighter that get you to the more interesting decision space. But I think heavier games that get you there are more plentiful, if that makes any sense. So I still like my heavy games. But yeah, it is an interesting way of looking at the charts.
I think it's it reminds me of asking someone what their favorite 5 novels are. No one is going to tell you that it's Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games. You know what I mean? They're going to make crap up and say that it's War and Peace or
nobody would say that Harry Potter's their favorite novel.
Oh my God, they will never shut up, those Harry Potter fans.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying you're wrong.
No, but Harry Potter is a special exception. I think that generally speaking, we don't go around telling people that our favorite, The Bachelor, is not my favorite TV program, even though I watch it every season. So when we're rating things, we're going to signpost things that represent me as opposed to things that they genuinely enjoy.
Yeah, it sort of ties into the discussion on guilty pleasures and why you should just enjoy the things that you enjoy, frankly. Without...
Catan.
Exactly. I mean, without drawing too much inference from the data, which could mean any number of things. I don't think that you ever have a good reason to not proudly proclaim that you like a light game. They exist to fill a specific space and can be genuinely excellent at that.
There was an article going around at work saying that people are leaning into nostalgia right now. And a couple of my bosses were like, yeah, I've been enjoying my mother's recipes. I went back and listened to classic music. And I was like, I re-downloaded Pokemon Gold from 1997, but I didn't want to say it, Right. You know what I mean? Because I felt bad.
It was your Bachelor?
Huh?
It was your Bachelor? It was your admitting to The Bachelor or to Hunger Games?
Yes, but not Harry Potter.
Right.
Never Harry Potter.
That is going to do it for this week's episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. Please check us out on all of our social media. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. Please come to our Discord, boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. We hang out in there. We're here to chat to you about board games and other topics. And thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro and outro music. What's on your mind, kid? Goodbye.
See ya.
So long. The way that we have worked... Oh, we haven't clapped.
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. Nealon wasn't in place at the start of the 3, 2, 1 clap, but you got in.
I got there.
Like an Olympian.
Uh-huh.
Right before it started.
Running in from the changing room.
So, in getting this doggo that Christina is obsessed with...
Oh my God. Okay, first of all, you complain about the teach and you're going to use doggo?
I complain about everything.
Okay,
first
that's
of all,
true.
That's a starting place.
But I can't believe you use doggo.
Second of all, what I have retained in this deal, okay, is full naming rights.
So which Pokemon are you going to name the dog after?
Well, so far I'm saying it has to be food-based name, so either like Waffle or Bugle. I don't know what dog we're getting, so it's just fun to annoy her, What was the other name I wanted? There was like a multi-part name that I was particularly... Oh, Topo Chico, after the sparkling mineral water. So yeah, that's a great bargaining chip because previously I didn't want a dog, but now that I get to name it anything I want, I'm in. Maybe Canada Dry.
As long as you have branding control.
That is true. I have a particular need inside me.
To brand.
So you'll become one of the tanks in the board game barrage arsenal. That's not right. What is it called? The armory.
Arsenal.
You'll become one of the tanks in the board game barrage arsenal. Oh my god.